When we age, when we lose weight, this is the layer that really, really changes significantly, and the layer that we need to work on the most when it comes to our volumizers and fillers.
The other thing I wanted to mention was I want you to look at the buccal fat. It's down here. It is contiguous with the superficial fat pad up in the temple. If you inject the temple in the wrong layer, that filler can migrate or redistribute all the way down to the buccal fat. So some people who have had a lot of fillers in their life, they've had a lot of fillers in this area, temples and such, you can ultrasound this area and find filler in this area because it's redistributed down into the buccal area.
Superficial fat pad. Now, as you can see, there's a lot more compartments to the superficial fat pad. These are going to be bound by some ligamentous structures, or whether it's the actual ligaments, the true ligaments themselves, or the false ligaments. Now, this layer actually, in my opinion, and anatomically, does not change a significant amount with age. So this is where you're talking about if you have a chicken skin and you pull that skin layer back and you see that fat layer right there above the muscle. This is the superficial fat pad. And the superficial fat pads actually, if you really anatomically look at it, does not change very much as we age. And if you think about it, a thin layer of fat, losing 25% of that thin layer of fat is still a thin layer of fat. So it's really not as significant. So this is where over the years, my injection techniques have changed, and actually try not to put too much into these layers, because it's not a evolution of this fat layer thinning out. It's more of an evolution of the fat layer dropping and drooping downwards. And this is where I love to play with threads, biostimulators, things that will either mildly thicken it up, like biostimulators, to create more structure and fullness in a milder way. Or I'm looking at the fat pad that has lost its projection, that has dropped downwards now, like a drape, it's dropped down, and to reposition and pull this layer back into position. So this is not my favorite layer for fillers, even though majority of the fillers that are FDA approved come and get their approval, especially in the US, they get their approval for this layer of tissue.
This is when people inject in this layer all the time. They don't understand facial aging. And these are the people that start looking puffy and overdone and hard. They look unnatural because it's in a layer where we didn't lose the fat. In the mid-face here, when we're looking at this, I told you the mid-face fat we do lose. It kind of disintegrates. This superficial medial cheek fat pad, which is superficial, is on top. So we've got the SMAS in between, which is the muscle and some of the nerves and arteries. So what happens is we lose the deep fat pad, so that shrinks down, and this superficial fat pad we don't lose it, it just gets a little kind of fluffy and kind of just not as strong. Yeah. It ends up kind of sliding. So I want you to think of the deep fat pad as your box spring, and I want you to think of the superficial fat pad as the top mattress. We lose the box spring and the mattress slides. So what do we need to do? Just try to fix the mattress? Nope, it's just going to stay there. We need to build back that box spring, and it's going to pull it back up. Okay? So picture that and think about that when you're doing fillers. Always start with a deep compartment. Yes. Now, can you inject in that superficial compartment? You can. Keep it minimal. Yep. And I want you to think of just using that any superficial compartment as frosting.
Yes.
You're kind of like taking a little spatula and just frosting the cake, getting some little wrinkles out of the frosting, and that's about it. Little nasal jugal groove. That can be a little frosting. Okay, so think about it that way.
Yeah, that's a very, very great way of putting it. It's really a frosting layer. You don't want to overdo it. And remind yourself, this is the layer that's on top of the muscle. You put a good amount of frosting on top of a muscle, and then you're smiling and moving and accentuating. Well, guess what? That top layer is going to bunch and move, and that's how you get these people who smile and their eyes disappear. They look literally like big puffy marshmallows, is because this was not fillers, to me, are not meant to be placed into this area consistently. It's meant to just be a frosting. You don't want to overdo the frosting, otherwise it overpowers everything else. And so this is where understanding the aging process helps you understand, okay, this is the layer that really doesn't lose a lot of volume. So why am I adding volume back into an area that isn't losing that much volume? If anything, it's dropping and draping downwards. If you really, really anatomically look at it, we know that the bone and the deep fat pad have lost volume. So if that structure underneath has lost volume, the top three structures, the muscle, the fat, and the skin, literally have no projection power. So what it's going to do is just going to drape downwards and just fall. It's kind of, boobs are one of the things I use a lot. You lose the fat in the boobs, guess what it does? And drops down. So ultimately, that's where you really, why understanding these aging processes are very important, because you want to replace like with like, as Lori says. It's like with like. Why is it there? Just because you see hollowness and you can plump it up doesn't mean that you want to actually do that. You need to take in consideration the whole process of aging.
So we kind of talked about fat pad loss. This is a good visual of how some of these deep fat pads kind of shrink. And if you imagine you've got this, you've got your, like I said, your box spring under there, and it's all fluffy when you're young. And when you lose that support, the skin starts to sag over it. So it can be a skin issue also, but the first thing we need to address is volume. If we replace their volume where they've lost volume so that they look normal, like they used to use look a few years ago, then we address the skin. Okay? Don't forget the skin. Don't ever put volume in as a main goal of lifting sagging skin. Put volume in to replace volume. Make sure they look balanced for their given anatomy. Then address the skin. Because if you put volume in to lift skin, you've got a Cabbage Patch doll or a bowling ball head. And you don't want that. And that's what people's fear is nowadays with this whole filler thing. Thank you, social media, for scaring everybody away from fillers. But people can have a lot of fillers and look really natural. It depends on where it's placed.